A cold wind swept along the battlements of the Red Keep, rustling the banners of House Baratheon and House Lannister that hung side by side. Far below, torchlight flickered in narrow corridors where servants whispered of countless rumors. Yet none of those whispers compared to what was transpiring in the Queen's chambers this night. Within her dimly lit room, Queen Cersei Lannister clung to sweat-soaked bedsheets, face pale as she cried out in pain. Amid her anguished screams, Grand Maester Pycelle and a team of midwives worked feverishly, each acutely aware of the stakes, a royal birth that could change the fate of Westeros. King Robert Baratheon stood by the bed, shoulders rigid. His broad chest rose and fell in time with his wife's shrieks. Though the king was often aloof or lost in his cups, no one could miss the intensity in his eyes tonight. He watched Cersei's every gasp and contortion with a mixture of apprehension and pride, silently praying to the Seven that this child would be strong and unmistakably his. Over the past months, the court had whispered of the Queen's suspected infidelities, but Robert clung to a single hope, that his wife carried his true heir, the prince who would continue the Baratheon line in truth. Not only a name. At last, Cersei let out a final, piercing cry, and her body fell slack against the pillows. A trembling midwife lifted a small, wailing infant into the torchlight. The child's hair, though still damp, was startlingly dark. Even in the gloom, it shone like a raven's wing. Robert, eyes wide, gently took the baby from the midwife's arms. He peered at that shock of black hair, his heart hammering. It was proof this child was his, so clearly a Baratheon and not a golden-haired Lannister mistake. "He's mine," Robert declared, voice hushed with reverence. "My son." He held the baby high enough that Cersei could see. She lay panting, her face slick with sweat, but within her exhausted gaze there burned a flicker of satisfaction. For a moment, she almost smiled. Grand Maester Pycelle cleared his throat, ever mindful of proper ceremony. "Your Grace, what name shall we proclaim for the realm's new prince?" Robert looked down at the tiny infant, who squirmed and squawked in his father's powerful arms. "Damon," the king said. "Prince Damon Baratheon, first of his name." Cersei let out a shaking exhalation, closing her eyes. She felt the swirl of possibility around them. This was Robert's child indeed, a boy with black hair and a stronger tie to the throne than any other rumored offspring. Perhaps, she thought, this could shift everything. Perhaps it would make Robert kinder. Perhaps she could even learn to care for her husband's child in a way she had not expected. Yet in the corners of Cersei's mind, ambition still lurked, like a lion ready to pounce. Whether the child would truly bring unity or only a sharper edge to the family's machinations remained to be seen. In the days after Damon's birth, King's Landing erupted in celebration. The small folk cheered in the winding streets, praising the arrival of a prince who bore the Baratheon features more plainly than any child of the Queen so far. Taverns filled with merriment casks of ale and wine were emptied in tribute to the new heir. Meanwhile, the Red Keep bustled with well-wishers and flatterers, eager to endear themselves to the king by congratulating him on his healthy son. Robert basked in this rare sense of satisfaction. He had fathered countless bastards in the city, but none of those children mattered now that he had a legitimate boy of his own blood. Cersei allowed the court to see her in controlled appearances, pale and regal. She was not the type to swoon over her infant in public. She had too many hidden agendas for that. But in private, she nursed Damon with careful attention, as though acknowledging that his life might someday form the linchpin of her entire future. There were moments, late at night, when Cersei simply watched Damon sleep in his cradle. Her emotions warred within her. Maternal instinct wrestled with cool ambition. Yet she found herself fiercely protective of this child, her son, Robert's legitimate heir. As Damon grew into toddlerhood, he became a point of pride for King Robert. The little prince waddled around the throne room, giggling, chasing after motes of dust in the air. Servants indulged him, and the king's guard found themselves awkwardly cooing at the black-haired boy who might one day sit the Iron Throne. From the earliest years, Damon displayed bursts of energetic curiosity. He would toddle after dogs in the courtyard, unafraid of their barks. He tried to climb onto chairs that loomed above his line of sight, determined to see the world from higher vantage points. Whenever Robert observed him, he would grin and boast, "That boy's a true Baratheon, brave as a boar." Soon enough, Damon reached an age where he could run about the Red Keep with more freedom. At 5, he discovered the hidden nooks and crannies of Maegor's Holdfast, racing along corridors that smelled of dust and old tapestries. He often found his half-sister Myrcella, who was just a few years younger, and pulled her into games of pretend. They would mimic knights and princesses, Damon brandishing a small wooden sword while Myrcella clapped or tried to run away. A gentle child, Myrcella looked up to her older half-brother with something close to awe. Damon, in turn, felt protective of her. He never quite understood why Joffrey, his other half-sibling, sneered at Myrcella and teased her. Nor did Damon grasp why Joffrey seemed to resent him, always insisting on his own superiority as the oldest prince. At that tender age, Damon only knew what children knew, who was kind and who was not. Joffrey, in Damon's eyes, was simply mean-spirited, a puzzle he couldn't solve. Within the court, however, the difference in the two princes was clear. Damon had black hair and carried himself with a nascent confidence reminiscent of Robert. Meanwhile, Joffrey sported golden locks and features more akin to the Lannisters. It was no secret that the king admired Damon with open pride. He often invited the boy to his side at feasts, delighting in letting the child taste his first sips of watered-down ale. People watched this dynamic with intense interest. Even back then, rumors flew like ravens on the wind. Does Robert favor the younger boy? Is it because he knows something about Joffrey's birth that the rest of us don't? Such whispers clung to every corridor. Yet Damon was young and blissfully unaware of such poisonous talk. His days consisted of running about with Myrcella, exploring hidden corners of the Red Keep, and trying to get out of his daily lessons. While Joffrey scowled through sword drills, complaining about having to sweat, Damon found a strange enjoyment in the clang of wooden practice swords, the jabs and parries that made him feel brave. Sir Darren Oakhart from the Reach was assigned as Damon's tutor in both knightly arts and courtly manners. Patient yet firm, Sir Darren saw promise in the boy's enthusiasm. "You have a solid stance for one so young," the knight said, adjusting Damon's grip. "But remember, a true knight must master not just the blade, but his own impulses. Strength untempered is dangerous." The prince nodded, chest puffed in pride. He liked the feeling of success in training, the tangible sense of improvement whenever he managed a neat parry. Yet behind Sir Darren's lessons was always the knowledge that Damon was no ordinary boy. His destiny, if the realm had its say, might be to someday command armies and decide the fates of lords. Cersei, ever calculating, arranged for Damon's education in reading, heraldry, and court dynamics, seeing an opportunity to mold the boy into a prince with Lannister cunning. She quietly guided his interest toward the notion that knowledge could be as powerful as a longsword. Late at night, she would speak to him by candlelight, her voice nearly purring with quiet intensity. "Allies," she would whisper, "are pieces on a Savas board, my sweet boy. With the right alliances, you can win any war before a single sword is drawn." Damon, half asleep, would nod, not entirely understanding, but absorbing the lesson that relationships in the Red Keep were rarely simple. King Robert, for his part, preferred to spend time teaching Damon how to fight, or drink, or boast of old battles. There were mornings when a hungover Robert would take Damon onto the castle ramparts, pointing at the city below. "See those roofs, boy?" he would say, voice rough. "One day, they'll all look to you. Then you'll know what a heavy thing it is to be king." "But you're the king," Damon would reply, blinking up at his father. "I only want to be your son." Robert would laugh, a sound edged with regret. I'm the king, but you're my true heir. Don't ever forget that." At times, Damon did not know what to do with this notion that he was heir to a realm. Yet even as a child, he sensed that something large and dangerous loomed in that destiny. It was not just about feasts and tourneys. It was about the swirling chaos he glimpsed in the eyes of every courtier who bent the knee to him or slyly tried to get on his good side. Damon felt that swirl gathering, but didn't yet comprehend its depth. By the time he was 10, Damon had acquired a certain poise that set him apart from many children. During a grand festival in King's Landing, organized ostensibly for his name day, he sat beside his father and mother on the royal dais, feeling pride and a flutter of anxiety. The city was alive with excitement. Tourneys were held in honor of Prince Damon. Knights thundered across the field in gleaming armor, lances leveled. Damon watched each impact with rapt eyes. Joffrey remained nearby, sullen and unimpressed, but Damon could hardly contain his awe at the spectacle. His tutor, Sir Darren, participated in the joust and unhorsed two challengers with graceful strikes. King Robert bellowed cheers, sloshing wine as he celebrated the skill of Damon's teacher. When the jousts ended, Cersei leaned close to Damon, speaking so only he could hear. "One day, all this will be yours, but remember, everything in this life has a cost. Do not let glory blind you to consequences." He squirmed a little under her intense gaze, uncertain what she meant. Yet part of him liked the idea that such a grand affair might be repeated in his honor someday when he ruled in truth. That night, his excitement left him restless. He couldn't sleep, so he wandered the hallways, eventually slipping into a corridor that led to the castle's training yard. There, he found Jaime Lannister practicing by moonlight, the Kingslayer moving through sword forms as though dancing. The sweep of steel under the moon had a hypnotic beauty. Jaime noticed Damon and offered a small smirk. "You're up late, nephew," he said. "Couldn't sleep?" Damon nodded. "The festival was overwhelming. I wanted to see something real." Jaime tossed him a wooden practice sword. "Show me what Sir Darren has taught you." "Heart-pounding," Damon complied, launching into the basic forms he had studied. Jaime corrected him occasionally, adjusting his feet, teaching him to watch an opponent's eyes instead of their blade. The weight of Jaime's regard was both thrilling and unnerving for Damon. There were rumors about Jaime that he had heard, whispers that he was more than just the Queen's brother. But the boy lacked the full context to piece it together. What he understood clearly was Jaime's prowess. The man moved like a predator, lethal grace in every pivot. "Well done," Jaime said at the end, giving Damon's shoulder a small squeeze. "But don't rely on raw strength alone. Your father's blood gives you power, yes, but a quick mind can beat brute force." Damon felt a surge of pride at Jaime's praise, but as he returned to his chambers, wooden sword in hand, his thoughts churned with questions. He was a boy of two lineages, Baratheon strength and Lannister cunning. Which side would define him? His existence within the Red Keep became more complex as he edged into his 12th year. While he used to run about freely, now Damon noticed the hush that would fall when he entered a room. Servants bowed with particular gravity, or they scurried away as though frightened. Courtiers offered him sweet compliments, hinting that he was the king's favorite. The boy gleaned that there was tension regarding Joffrey's place succession. The older prince rarely wasted an opportunity to remind people that he was the firstborn. Damon, for his part, grew weary of the constant undercurrent of competition. He only wanted to train, learn, and perhaps experience a realm beyond the Red Keep's claustrophobic walls. One day, in search of pastries from the royal kitchens, Damon overheard two off-duty gold cloaks talking about Joffrey's cruelty, how Joffrey had used a crossbow to torture a caged animal for sport. Damon's stomach churned with disgust. He had seen Joffrey's petty acts of cruelty before, but eavesdropping on these grown men who seemed truly unsettled by Joffrey's behavior opened Damon's eyes further. It hinted that Joffrey could become dangerous in a position of unfettered authority. Just then, Lord Varys appeared as though conjured from the shadows. "My prince," he said, voice smooth as satin, "it's late. You should be resting. Or might you be searching for secrets?" There was a knowing glint in the Master of Whisperers' eyes, and Damon felt a jolt of apprehension. Varys seemed to read him with uncanny insight, as though any stray thought Damon had was already mapped out in the spider's web. The boy told himself he would do well to be cautious around Varys. As if to confirm Damon's growing sense of foreboding, news arrived that Jon Arryn, the king's hand, was dead under suspicious circumstances. Robert sank into a black mood. He often roamed the castle in drunken rages, bellowing about how the man who had once been like a father to him could perish so suddenly. Whispers of poison circulated. Tension soared when Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Robert's old friend, arrived to assume the position of hand. Damon watched the tall, solemn Northerner stride through the Red Keep, an obvious outsider but one who carried himself with quiet dignity. The boy remembered meeting Lord Stark once when he was younger, sensing something unbreakable in the man's spirit. Eddard Stark brought his daughters, Sansa and Arya, to court. Their presence injected new energy into the stifling environment. Sansa was ladylike and courteous, seeming to relish the grandeur of the capital at least initially. Arya was her opposite, feisty, curious, uninterested in embroidery or polite conversation. Damon gravitated toward Arya's candid nature. She reminded him that not everyone in King's Landing was entrenched in deception. They had fleeting interactions in courtyards or during feasts. Once, at a banquet, Damon tried politely conversing with both Stark girls, only to have Arya snort in disgust over the city's smell, while Sansa smiled primly, determined to please Joffrey. Damon laughed at Arya's blunt honesty, though he sensed the tension it caused around the table. If King Robert's presence signaled rowdy feasts and impulsive hunts, Ned Stark's presence signaled an inevitable reckoning. The new hand's investigations into Jon Arryn's death grew relentless. Damon noticed that Lord Stark spent hours reading through musty ledgers, rummaging through genealogies of noble houses. Rumor had it that Jon Arryn's final words pointed to some truth about the royal children. Curiosity pricked Damon's mind, but he tried to focus on the simpler joys of training. He did not realize, in his innocence, that Ned Stark's inquiries would soon come crashing into Damon's own life. One afternoon, while Damon was roaming the lower levels of the Red Keep, he caught sight of Arya Stark practicing swordplay with a Braavosi named Syrio Forel. Intrigued, he watched Arya attempt the fluid motions of the so-called water dance. The style was all about finesse, not brute strength. When Syrio paused, Arya noticed Damon lingering. "You want something?" she asked, half teasing, half guarded. I've never seen that style," he admitted. "Could I try?" Syrio raised an eyebrow, a trace of a smile crossing his lips. "The water dance is not for every swordsman, my prince. Are you agile, patient, quick?" Damon shrugged. "I'm more used to the heavy swings of a longsword, but I'd like to learn anything new." They practiced under Syrio's watchful eye, Arya occasionally smirking when Damon stumbled. Despite his Baratheon strength, he found the water dance puzzling. Every step required precision. Every dodge demanded perfect timing. Still, the challenge exhilarated him. By the time he stopped for breath, sweat glistened on his brow. Arya tossed him a rag, remarking that he moved like a knight, not a dancer, but he detected a hint of respect in her tone. Before they could continue, Lannister guards appeared, led by Sandor Clegane, the Hound. Damon quickly took charge, explaining that the training session was at his invitation. The Hound gave him a withering look, but accepted the prince's command. It was a minor moment in the grand scheme of palace intrigues, yet for Damon it marked a turning point. He realized how precarious it was to befriend someone like Arya, who existed outside the typical structures of flattery and subservience. Still, he found it refreshing to engage with her. It reminded him there was life beyond constant manipulations. Soon, however, Lord Stark's discoveries about the legitimacy of the royal children began to penetrate the heart of the Red Keep. Damon was unaware that Ned Stark had found a shocking pattern in the lineages of House Baratheon. They always produced heirs with dark hair, with no exceptions. Joffrey and his siblings, golden-haired, did not match. Damon alone did. But the boy himself had yet to confront that frightening truth head-on. Then, everything changed in a single night. Damon, having finished a late lesson with Ser Darren, was making his way back to his chambers when he heard voices echoing from a corridor. Carefully, he edged closer, peering around a corner to see Lord Stark and Queen Cersei locked in a heated exchange. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Lord Stark's voice was low but urgent. "I know about your brother and you. I know these children of yours with golden hair. None belong to King Robert. Joffrey is not Robert's son, nor are Myrcella or Tommen. Only Damon is truly his heir." Cersei's eyes blazed with fury. "You presume too much, Stark. You endanger my family, including Damon, if you reveal this." Stark seemed torn, as though trying to show some measure of empathy. "Whatever your sins, the boy Damon deserves to know who he is. Robert is dying. I won't see the throne usurped by a false line, and I won't see the realm destroyed by war. Damon's the only true Baratheon child, and—" Damon felt his heart drop into his stomach. The meaning of their words thundered in his mind. Joffrey wasn't Robert's son? Myrcella and Tommen too? That explained the differences he'd always seen but never understood. An urgent desire to flee warred with an equally urgent desire to burst into the open and demand answers. In the end, shock paralyzed him. He stood there, listening, unable to believe the magnitude of the lie. Cersei advanced on Stark, voice dripping with menace. "You should have stayed silent. The realm is not ready for Damon, or for any truth that upends the world's illusions. If you proceed, you bring doom upon us all, including the boy." Damon retreated before they could notice him, mind swirling. If Ned Stark was telling the truth, Damon was Robert's only legitimate child. That made him the rightful heir, displacing Joffrey and the others entirely. The thought was terrifying. That evening, a raven arrived, bearing even worse news. King Robert had been mauled by a boar while hunting, gravely wounded. In the days that followed, the king lingered in a feverish state. Ned Stark tried to intervene, pressing for a rightful succession, but forces moved swiftly in the shadows. Cersei had the gold cloaks in her pocket, aided by Littlefinger's cunning. When Robert finally died, the realm spiraled into chaos. Joffrey was proclaimed king with shocking haste. Crowds gathered in the throne room, forced to kneel. Ned Stark attempted to present Robert's dying wish, which supposedly named Damon as heir, or at least recommended a regency. The attempt failed miserably. Under the cover of betrayal, men loyal to Cersei and Joffrey seized the Lord of Winterfell and executed his guards. Ned Stark himself was thrown into a dungeon, condemned as a traitor. Damon, horrified, tried to confront his mother, but she brushed him aside, telling him to remain silent if he valued his life. Confusion racked him. Hadn't she just told Ned Stark that revealing the truth would doom him? Desperate for answers, Damon slipped into Cersei's chambers. He found her standing at a window, overlooking a courtyard where Joffrey was already strutting about in fancy robes. "What have you done?" Damon asked, voice shaking. Lord Stark was only trying to fulfill Father's last will, wasn't he? Cersei turned, green eyes flashing. "Lord Stark wanted to tear this family apart. You don't understand the danger. If he had his way, Joffrey would be denounced. Tommen and Myrcella, too. War would rip the kingdom in half." "But Joffrey isn't Father's son," Damon said. "If I—" Cersei surged forward, grabbing Damon's shoulders. "You are my son," she hissed. "Yes, your father is Robert. But if you claim that throne, do you think the realm will simply accept it? The Lannisters will not stand aside. Your Uncle Tywin will never allow it. Too many pieces are in motion. Lord Stark's honorable intentions have already led to bloodshed. If we want to keep our family alive, if you want your siblings alive, you must stay silent." Damon felt tears burning at the corners of his eyes. He thought of Joffrey's cruelty, Myrcella's sweet smiles, Tommen's naivete, and his father Robert's final hours. Was he supposed to let Ned Stark die to preserve a lie? Yet if he exposed the falsehood, how many more would die in the wars that followed? The boy could barely breathe from the weight of it all. "If I do nothing," he whispered, "Ned Stark will be killed for treason he didn't commit." Cersei's voice wavered. "That is Joffrey's decision. I'm trying to have him show mercy, but Joffrey, he's headstrong, and he wants to prove himself as king. Nothing I say guarantees Stark's safety." She released Damon's shoulders, stepping back. Her eyes, the same color as his, brimmed with complex emotion. "Understand this, Damon. You either stand with us, or you stand against us. And standing against us will only bring death."